This edition of Mac Voices is supported by Screencasts Online, your source for new Mac and iOS tutorials every week. To learn more and for a 14-day free trial, visit screencastsonline.com. Welcome to Mac Notables on Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, Ted Landau, Mr. Happy. Ted,
here I am.
It's great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
And I'm sorry because...
I haven't written me yet.
Oh, guys, I'm sorry, folks. We were having a pre-show discussion that I haven't recovered from completely yet. God, Ted, so I think where we left off, is like the old serials. Last time, you had solved a problem with your Yosemite installation that had to do with Audio Hijack Pro and updating some software. Mm-hmm. How's it been going since?
Well, first, let me to just recap a bit. Let me just say I have two computers running Yosemite now. One is my MacBook Pro, and one is my much older Mac Pro 2009 version. And the MacBook Pro, which actually started running on the beta version, developer beta version, has been running rock solid. I've had zero problems with it. So certainly that would lead me to believe that any problems I'm having with the Mac Pro are not inherent to the update itself necessarily. Some unfortunate interaction between the Mac Pro and Yosemite. My Mac Pro continues to have minor glitches that keep popping up from time to time. One of the problems I had initially, which I thought was due to the Audio Hijack Pro thing that you mentioned, turned out not to be. It was one of the least serious ones. So I mean, the whole issue with Audio Hijack Pro stands pretty much the way I described it. But one issue that I had was that every time I restarted, the desktop pictures and screensaver selection that I made reverted back to the default. And I thought I had that fixed, but then it started happening again. And I read all sorts of things about what to do, including, it turns out, as I recall, there were some files in the library/preferences folder that used to control that have now been deprecated, and someone suggested that if you have them hanging around, which I did, to delete them. I did. That didn't have any effect. Tried some other things. So far, nothing that I've tried has gotten that to work. And other slight things like that come up. Sometimes they just appear, and then if I restart the computer, they're gone. Sometimes I have to track down a solution on the web, looking through Apple support communities and stuff like that. There was a minor problem I had. This one I don't think was related actually to Yosemite, but there was a minor problem I had with Apple TV syncing photos, and that required a little bit of effort, but it just, I have a feeling, again, I think we talked about this last time, and maybe we can just leave it at that. I have a feeling that my Mac Pro has just too much legacy crap I think the longer you keep a computer, and I'm not sure what the solution is. I was going to say, I looked at my preferences. I'm backing up here. I looked at my preferences folder when I started worrying about that screensaver thing. And I had preferences files in my preferences folder that went back, I think, to 2002. And some of them I started deleting because I can't imagine that I was still that they were somehow still affecting the computer if they hadn't been modified since 2002. But it makes you start wondering how many files are there from 2002, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that could possibly be affecting how the computer is running. And what is the effective way to go through your files and delete the ones that are okay to delete and keep the ones that you should keep? There are it's something maybe we could discuss more another day. There are Clean Your Mac type software, but I don't think even the Clean Your Mac type software is capable of really doing that fine-grained level of analysis.
I'm curious, do you use any of the app deletion utilities? Because I know probably the first best way to delete something off of your Mac, assuming we're talking about software you're ready to replace or just get rid of, is if it has an uninstaller. That would seem to be best, but I've had really good luck with a program called App Delete that just doesn't just take out the application itself, but it takes out the pref files and a lot of the support files. And so I think my Mac is probably cleaner as a result of that. But that doesn't mean that sometimes I don't forget and just toss something in the trash, and that's like, oops, now, I almost have to reinstall it so it will go back, access all those files, and then I can delete it properly.
No, I don't use apt delete. That's a good point. I do have a couple of utilities like that claim to uninstall all the associated files. But I don't really delete that many applications. I'm pretty spare about what I install, and what I install I intend to keep. Sometimes even if I don't really use it, I keep it anyway. I don't have that many applications, and so well, if I thought it was worth installing, it's usually worth keeping around on the off chance that I might need it one day. And I'm not out of hard drive space or anything, so it just sort of hangs around. So I don't think that would have a major effect. At this point, it's probably too late anyway, because I have to go back and try to remember what I deleted 2 years ago or something like that. I think at this point it's almost easier. What I thought about doing is doing a search of my library folder organized by date. Say something like search for everything that's older than the last 2 years and see what comes up, and delete most of it, because it's sort of like cleaning out your room. If you haven't touched it in 6 months, you can probably get rid of it or something like that. So probably what I would also do at that point is, of course, back up the entire folder and archive. In fact, that was actually something I was thinking of doing today. I haven't gotten around to it yet. Making a backup, say, just to the preferences folder. Start there, and archive it, so that if I need any of those preferences back, I can still return them. Because really, shuttling preferences in and out is real simple. At most, you'd have to log out and log back in to activate the preferences file that you drag back to the folder. And then deleting virtually every preferences file that's more than a year old. And just see what happens. See if things run smoothly, and see, there might be a few applications that default back to some settings that aren't the custom settings that I made, or that ask for a password again or something like that. But my guess is that if I did that, 90% of what I use would run just fine. So it might make the Mac run better overall. And then if that works, start looking at a couple of other folders. That the application support folder would be another likely one. The cache folder I do nuke occasionally anyway, so I don't think that would really help me, but stuff like that.
Folks, in case you're thinking about doing some of the things Ted just described, by all means, don't skip the backup part, and then maybe do a second backup just to be sure, because going in and doing that kind of surgery, if you're Ted, it's fine. If you're the rest of us, maybe not so much.
According to my wife, it's not always fine, even if it's me. Because if things go wrong, there tend to be noises from the office that are distressing.
Yeah. Ted, I can't remember if we covered this or not before, but on both Macs or either Mac, did you just install over top of the existing, or did you do a nuke and pave, or did you install and then import using Migration Assistant?
Definitely did not use Migration Assistant. On the Mac Pro, I just installed over the Mavericks installation that was there. Who knows what I did on the Mac Pro at this point. I mean, it started off as just a direct install over Mavericks, but then when things started going wrong, in an attempt to figure out what was happening and fix it, I did 19 different things. So what's left at this point is hard to say.
I don't know about you, but when I start doing those kind of surgeries, it's very analog, but I pull out a pad and a piece of paper and try to make some notes about what I'm doing along the way, so I can undo what's possible and replace the files that maybe I just took out. So it's because it's so easy to think, oh, this will fix it, and then 23 steps later, well, maybe this will fix it, and then you have no idea where you started, stopped, or what happened.
Well, yes, in that regard, one thing that I did that definitely didn't work, but I know I didn't talk about this last time, and I also, when I wrote the article about the whole Audio Hijack Pro thing, I didn't go into this either, because it wouldn't have helped explain the solution, and just would have done nothing good, let's put it that way. But I wound up at one point, in order to test whether or not it was some old software that, like we're talking about now, that was at the heart of the problem, which of course it turned out to be. It was this old Audio Hijack Pro software. I installed a clean copy of Yosemite. I had a spare hard drive, and so I installed a copy I got the Yosemite installer, and just said install a copy of Yosemite, and so it was just there. I created a new user account for myself and everything, and just had a perfectly clean, as if it was a brand new computer, copy of Yosemite. And when I rebooted from that, the problem was gone. I said, great. And so one theory that I had at that point was, okay, now I'll just add things back until the problem comes back. And if the problem never comes back, good. And what that involved, adding things back in the system library folder and in the library folder, the root level library folder, and especially in the system library folder, I started getting messages that said, you needed to authenticate to make sure that you had the right privileges to add that back, which I did, and I thought I might be okay there. But the ownerships weren't correct. As you probably know, so a lot of the files in the system folder are owned by root or system, and if you add back the file by dragging it in the Finder as opposed to using a backup utility, which is what I did, often the ownership changes to you and not the system, and that can confuse the Mac. At some point, I started getting messages that some of the files in the extensions folder weren't working because of that. And I was putting up with all that. I know how to change the ownership, and so I was modifying the ownership to go back to system instead of me, as I thought was necessary. But then just a cascade of things started going wrong. And at one point, I lost my administrative status of the new user account that I created. Ooh. And it said I was just a standard. There was no administrator account at all on the system, and so I said, "This is not good." And that was at that point. That I said maybe this wasn't the best approach, and so then I doubled back, and I wound up restoring. I think I wound up restoring Yosemite at that point. Restoring Mavericks at that point from my backup, and starting all over again, and getting up on that whole way of doing things. So yes, as always, as we have probably said enough times that everyone who's ever listened to the show must have heard us say it at one point or another, backups are important.
How do you end up with no administrator account?
I don't know how it happened. I lost interest in how it happened. It was one of those things where, how it happened becomes less of a concern than undoing that it happened at all. So
you're not going to go back and try to recreate it?
No, I don't really want to.
No, I don't think so. You said something there about the fact that you nuke the caches every so often. I'm curious, do you run any of the maintenance utilities that are out there for the Mac, or is it something that you occasionally do by hand? And how do you feel about those maintenance utilities?
I don't use the maintenance utilities much anymore, and I can't really give you a good reason why in terms of whether I would recommend them or not. There was a period of time when I used things like Cocktail, and there was another one that I used a lot whose name eludes me now, but Cocktail is the one that comes to mind. I've used Clean My Mac for certain things from time to time, and they work fine. And actually, I don't recall ever having a problem with any of the things I tried to use them for. Excuse me, I feel like I'm about to sneeze. Edit point.
Yeah, big edit point.
No, the sneeze has gone away, maybe to come back later. But I guess my natural inclination is to want to do things manually, and just because I like to see what's going on and know what I'm doing. So I don't just simply nuke the cache folder. So I'll typically go into the caches folder and again organize it either alphabetically in this case, but sometimes by age, and go through them and just start tossing the ones that I think I want to toss, as opposed to just nuking the whole folder. And that way, I feel better that I know that I'm deleting what I intend to delete, and not something that I really didn't want to delete, which I'm less certain of when I use these third-party utilities, even though they usually work out just fine.
Yeah, it does take a bit of a leap of faith, especially when you're using the word delete. Whenever you're going to delete something that you're not in control of, and you're turning over that control to the application, you better know who's writing the application and what their credibility is.
Yeah, and you remind me. I'd just tell you a story. has nothing to do with those utilities, but just how bad things can go. An anecdote that reminds me, years ago, I was a speaker at Macworld Expo, the now departed Macworld Expo, sadly. And back in those days, I had my laptop, and I was giving a talk. And this was a talk back in the early days of Mac OS X, when people still spent a lot of time issuing Unix commands in terminal, which is an interesting topic in its own right. These days, almost no one does that anymore, except the few Unix geeks that like doing it that way. But the average person doesn't need all these little Unix tips that used to proliferate back in the early years of OS X. And so I was given a little short, I think when this talk involved a short talk on common Unix commands that you might want to know about as a Mac OS X user. And one of the commands was the remove command, RM. And I was going to do a live demo. I wanted to show how many, I had a live demo set up where I think I had a Finder window open with some files in it, and a terminal window open over here, and I was going to use the RM command to remove the files and show how they just disappeared from the Finder window on the right. Kind of a neat little demonstration showing the power of terminal. And I accidentally typed it wrong and said, erase my entire hard drive. Which it dutifully did. And then I started, not only did I see those few files in that folder, I saw it took about like a minute for everything to erase. I think I managed to stop it in mid-process, but not enough before a lot of damage was done. But I just started seeing everything start. It's sort of like you're taking shots at the ducks in an arcade game, and they just kept going down, disappearing. Oh my God, what am I doing? And of course, I'm on the road at a hotel. It's not like I had backups with me. And so, and it was before you could have cloud backups back in those days. So there was no hope of that either. So it was not a happy experience. I think I did have a flash drive that had the talk on it, the keynote or PowerPoint at probably at that point presentation. So I at least had a way of recovering that, but a whole crap load of stuff that I intended to use as part of the talk just went into the sink. So yeah, you have to be careful.
Well, you certainly demonstrated the power of the terminal at that point.
That's right. That's right.
This is what you can do if you're not careful.
Video cam to take a video of my hard drive disappearing in front of my eyes there.
Oh, yeah, that would have been. You probably wouldn't have been happy with anybody laughing at you at that point, but there is something now that you can look back and chuckle over.
Oh, yeah, it was very funny.
Yeah, I can tell you're ready to chew through nails. This edition of Mac Voices is supported by Screencasts Online, your source for new Mac and iOS tutorials every week. To learn more and for a 14-day free trial, visit screencastsonline.com. One thing we can all agree on, Don McAllister's Screencasts Online is the gold standard for screencast tutorials. Each week, Screencasts Online delivers a brand new Mac tutorial and also a brand new iOS tutorial. That means each week you get to learn something new for your Mac, iOS device, or both. And we're talking about in-depth, step-by-step instruction, not just quick overviews. And if that isn't enough, Screencasts Online Monthly Magazine brings interesting and informative articles to you each month via Apple's newsstand. With a back catalog of over 500 video tutorials, Screencasts Online is one of the most complete video resources for learning about Apple-oriented software on the web. You can enjoy a 14-day free trial to find out that Screencasts Online is right for you, then sign up for a quarterly or yearly subscription that includes everything, including Screencasts Online magazine. Just visit screencastsonline.com to sign up. Screencasts Online, video tutorials you will really watch and enjoy. Thanks to Screencasts Online for their support of Mac Voices. Ted, we've started to see the word virus appear a little more in relation to the Mac and even the iPhone. Can you give us maybe a level head about where we are with this? And I don't think we all care quite as much about the mechanics of it as, do we need to now start thinking seriously about virus software? Do we need to start taking precautions that maybe up to this point we haven't needed to?
Well, I don't think it's gotten that bad yet. I have not used an antivirus software on my Mac for probably 10 years, and I'm not rushing to do so now. And there really isn't any effective antivirus software, as far as I know, to put on an iOS device, so you don't really have an option there. The stuff that's coming out now, and I probably should have looked it up more before we start talking. I don't remember the names. I've read articles about them, but when you get to be my age, the names of new things like that elude you for a while. But there are a couple of new things that seem to attack iOS devices in particular. And it's kind of interesting. And apparently, since it's hard to attack an iOS device directly, they do so sort of a malware. It's not where it's a phishing expedition. You actually have to help them along a bit, the way I understand them. So you'll get some email that says the latest version of the software is available, and it's actually a trick. And when you install the software, it could replace an app that's on your iPhone. It might not even be the app that is the one that they claim to be updating. Could be some entirely different app, and that will have some malware in it where it can actually extract data from your iPhone and change things around and so on. Not good. From what I've read, though, most people are not at risk if you are conservative in your approach. If you only get software from the App Store and you don't click on any suspicious links in email, and you don't jailbreak your iPhone and get software from third-party sources. If you avoid, if you take that approach, which I would recommend doing in general at this point, then the odds that something bad would happen to you are pretty low. And even if you don't do all those things, the odds of something bad happening to you are pretty low also, but not quite as low.
I guess the more I read about it, just what you said, common sense approaches to things: don't go to questionable sites and download questionable software. And the App Store obviously is a safer place, but if you go to a reputable third party who is selling their software on the web, be aware who they are, what they are, and take just a couple precautions, like having a backup before you install it, just to be sure. But I guess it just struck me as yet another one of those things that the flare goes up and a lot of link bait gets created, playing on people's fears. I don't want to whistle in the dark, but at the same time, I'm just not sure that it's as big a deal as maybe it's been made out to be already.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't want to sound like you can't criticize the Mac or something like that. But yes, there's a sense in which many sites seem to want to make the danger seem either just in the headline to get you to click on it, or in the article itself, want to make the danger seem more prevalent than it really is, because it's news. If it is, the Mac has a long history of not being very vulnerable to this sort of stuff, and Apple has even made it part of their PR campaign from time to time to make that claim. And then if you can say, well, now the Mac is as vulnerable as anything else, then that's news. And so anytime there is something like that comes along, people make a big deal of it. It isn't to say that you should ignore it, but most of these things, I think, are a bigger deal than they deserve to be. I agree with that. And one tip, for in terms of phishing, I do this pretty routinely, and I think is a good idea. Whenever you get an email that has links, and the email comes from a place that you're not certain, or even if you think you're certain, if it claims it's from Microsoft, say, but it looks a little unusual because you don't typically get emails like this from Microsoft, and you're wondering, is this really from Microsoft, or is it some sort of phishing scam? One thing that I do is, if there are any links in the article that they're encouraging you to click on, is I control click or right click, or however you want to do it, click, and it brings up a menu of options, one of which will say copy link as opposed to opening the link. And so then I will copy the link, and then I will paste it someplace else. And 99 times out of 100, if it's a phishing scam, the link will not say Microsoft. It will say something else. And as soon as you see that an email from Microsoft is telling you to click something that doesn't have Microsoft in its URL, it doesn't start with www.microsoft.com or something like that, then become very suspicious. And I typically will not not typically, I will never use those links. I mean, I might, if I have some reason to think that even though it's an unusual URL that might be legitimate anyway, I'll check further, or I'll just give up and not do it at all.
It's very tempting to say don't click on a link in an email, but I mean, I send out a legitimate email newsletter, obviously, and I like to see the reports you get back as to who clicked on what, because it indicates levels of interest. But when it comes to financial stuff and even some of the heavier duty places, yeah, I'm with you. I'd rather go to instead of clicking on a link in an email from my bank, I'd rather go to my bank site, log in to my account, and look for messages there. Because usually that'll anything they sent you an email will be there if it's legitimate.
Yeah, that's a good point too. If you get any email that says this is from your bank and you need to click this to reset your password because it's been compromised or something like that, rather than do that, go to the website. And if you really need to reset your password or whatever it is that says that they claim you have to do, it will tell you there. And it might even say your password doesn't work anymore or something like that. And if you go to the bank and you log in and your password worked, then there was something screwy about that email message. So yeah, anytime you get anything that is in the least out of the ordinary that could sound like it might compromise your system in some way, don't do it without confirmation.
And I think they're getting more clever, if that's possible. I remember seeing one in the last week I got that was sent to me, warrant for my arrest. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's the kind of thing I would like to know about if I'm going to be arrested. And then you realize, no, come on now, that's crazy.
Well, you can take the same approach. Wait for the police to knock on your door if there's really a warrant for your arrest. Otherwise, ignore it. So.
Or go to Mexico, one of the two.
Unless you know that there should be a warrant for your arrest, and that's a different story altogether.
Yeah. Then please pay attention. Please pay attention. It's, Ted, I can't remember. I know we've talked about email before in the past, but are you still using Gmail as your primary thing?
No. Okay. I have a lot of email addresses for various reasons. I have my own domain name, tedlandau.com, and so that's and the pair networks, which I've been using for decades, host it. And even though they're not the cheapest, I probably wouldn't have been. I don't want to disparage pair; they've been very good to me. But from a price point of view and from an ease of use point of view, they're probably not the one I would recommend most at this point. But I have so much inertia built in. Everything is just the way I want it. I just don't care anymore. So, but the point is, and in terms of your question, is I have a tedlandau.com email address, and that's my primary email address. Actually, I have a couple of email addresses associated with that account for various reasons. And then I have Gmail, and I have me.com or iCloud.com. That's a whole other story, actually. I have Apple's iCloud stuff. And I don't use Gmail primarily. In fact, I probably use Gmail the least right now. At one point, I thought I was going to use Gmail a lot. Gmail had a feature where you could tell it to forward mail from other email addresses to Gmail so that every email account that you had would be accessible just by checking your Gmail account, which I thought was kind of cool. And when I tried to set it up, it never worked as well as I would have liked. I don't even remember all the problems I had. It was a while ago, but it just didn't do what I thought it was going to do for me, and so I gave up on that approach.
Well, I ask because, first of all, I use Gmail. Second, I use exactly that approach, that all the email addresses I have forward into Gmail, and so I've got everything in one central place. If I hit reply, you get replied to from the email address you mailed me at. But also, Google does a great job of going through and taking care of a lot of that phishing stuff that we're talking about. That it recognizes that there's a suspicious payload in there, and it will mark it as such, and it'll let you know that it's there, but it won't let you access it unless you really jump through a couple hoops to get to it. And I really like that. I feel like that's something that you should look at in a mail provider. Is what kind of filtering are they doing? Now you can argue that, well, gee, they're looking inside all of your email. You're not reading everything, but they're running the algorithms to see if the viruses are there. Yeah, they are, but I'd rather have that than have something get through and have me be careless and then create a bigger problem.
Oh, I agree. If it had worked the way I would have been happy with, I probably would have stuck with that.
Yeah.
apparently it's working that way for you, so that's great.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned something about iCloud.
Oh yeah, just I had a, you know, my association with Apple's cloud services dates back to the .Mac addresses, and then got changed to the .me addresses, and then there's a .iCloud address as well. And apparently, you can use either one of those interchangeably with the same name on the, like, so my name is Ted Landau. So if I do Ted Landau at Mac.com, Ted Landau at me.com, or Ted Landau at iCloud.com, it doesn't make any difference. And that seems to be pretty true. So I can be logged in on my iPhone at Ted Landau at Mac.com, and I can be logged in on my Mac, for instance, at Ted Landau at me.com, and they will still sync as if they're logged into the same account. But every once in a while, I wonder if that's really true. And the other day, I started having some problem where, for example, this is another one of those Yosemite problems, too, that I mentioned. I couldn't recall at the time what it was, but I had a problem where I opened up Notes on my Mac, of which is supposed to instantly sync with the Notes version on your iOS devices, and found that it wasn't updating anymore. Like I had, at the time I updated to Yosemite, I had maybe a dozen notes in the Notes app. And all those dozen notes were there, but on my Mac, but they were an older version. And if I modified them on my Mac, they didn't change on my iPhone. And if I modified them on my iPhone, they changed every place else. They changed on my iPhone, on my iPad, on my MacBook Pro. Everything worked fine from the iPhone, except it didn't go back to the Mac. It was as if suddenly the Mac was an island unto itself that wasn't syncing with anything else. And of course, that was the Mac that I had all these Yosemite problems with. So I said, oh, here we go again, another problem. And eventually I had to, what I wound up doing that got things working again, in case you're interested, is I wound up deleting all the files on the Mac that didn't sync. But each time I did that, what I wound up doing was copying, using the copy-paste commands. I copied the information on the file, deleted the file, and then created a new file and pasted it into the new file. And the new files would sync. So if I had a file that said, hello, my name is Ted, so I said, select all, hello, my name is Ted, copy. And then I'd say, delete this note altogether. And then I'd go up and select new note. And then I'd paste, hello, my name is Ted, into the new note. And so essentially I had a duplicate of the old note, but one that I had just created at that moment. And the just created ones synced, but the old ones didn't. And so I had to go through all 12 of my notes and do that to get new copies that would then sync. And then there was some additional problems where where it still was getting confused, and I had two versions of each note for some reason. And eventually I sorted it all out. It seems to be working now.
I guess on the plus side, I haven't heard that many problems with the new iCloud and iCloud Drive once you actually make it over to Yosemite. Of course, during the introduction with iOS 8, there were questions over should you turn it on, should you not turn it on, when should you turn it on. Mm-hmm. But from what I've read and seen, so far, we're doing okay.
Yeah,
with the exception of your notes.
It works pretty well for me. Well, actually, the reason I told you that whole story, you may be wondering at this point, was because I was logged into .me.com on my Mac and Mac.com on my iPhone. And I started wondering whether somehow that was why it wasn't syncing. It turned out that it didn't seem to be the case, but it did for a moment there make me wonder whether that name difference might have something to do with it.
Yeah, that has always struck me as a little strange because you can use the email interchangeably, you can use the logins interchangeably. I've really been surprised that they didn't make something go away at some point and just say, okay, this is what it's going to need to be from now on. And I guess it's a real challenge to kill a Mac.com address for obvious reasons. You hate to do that. I'm not sure about the me.com. I mean, that I think could be dealt with, but I guess not.
Yeah, I don't know. And I've never used the iCloud.com name for some reason. Maybe just more letters. So I like me.com, and so I've stuck with that. That's sort of the default one that I use now, even though they don't support it directly anymore.
Yeah. Did you have you seen fit to buy any additional iCloud storage at this point?
No, not yet, but I probably will. But actually, what I have done, I haven't gotten it yet, is I decided, I getting me off on a tangent here, but I guess that's okay. I decided I wasn't going to, I think we've talked before. I have this 2009 Mac Pro, and I was thinking of getting a new iMac with Retina display to replace it. And I decided to hold off for a while. I'm going to wait to see when the 1.1 version of the Retina display comes out before I make a move at probably another 6 months. Excuse me, another 6 months or so, I hope. Because I'm not yet convinced that that's exactly what I want to do. Anyway, so then I started looking at my Mac Pro, and it occurred to me that I had upgraded a while ago to an SSD drive. It was a 125 gigabyte SSD drive, and I had that was sufficiently small that I couldn't put all my stuff on it, obviously. And so I wound up doing this complicated installation where the system software was on the SSD drive and my user account was on another drive and so on. And in even that, I'd saved some older user drives, some older hard drives for the user accounts that were like 500 gigabyte. And it was looking pretty clunky, and it was going to be awkward to try to transfer all this stuff to an iMac when the time came. It was looking like I didn't want to have to use the same sort of kludgy system that I had in place. So I said, maybe I should just get some new hard drives. They're not that expensive. And I looked, and I could get essentially a 500 gigabyte SSD drive, which would be like quadruple the size that I have now, and a 3 terabyte hard drive to replace everything that I had in my Mac Pro now, and the whole thing was less than $400. So I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm waiting for that stuff to arrive, and then I'm going to. I think I'll have I'll be able to keep virtually everything that I use on a daily basis will be on the SSD drive, and the 3 terabyte drive will just be for archival and maybe my iTunes library or something like that. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, that's probably the single best thing you can do to your Mac is get an SSD. It just well, before the show, I had to reboot this machine, which is a MacBook Pro, and there was a time that, oh boy, I'll be 15 minutes late calling Ted, and now it's like it didn't take a minute and a half, and everything is back up and running, and it's perfect. So I would say, you want a holiday gift, folks, if you are not bashful about getting into the insides of your machine. And if you are, find somebody to do it for you. But the SSD is a great way to go.
Well, and you heard it here. Chuck is going to give you a holiday gift of an SSD drive if you just email him.
I didn't remember that part.
That's what you said. You said if you wanted a holiday gift. I thought you were offering that as a holiday
gift. Yes, I did. I did phrase it that way. But, well, never mind.
I guess I misinterpreted it.
Yes. Don't email me, please, folks, asking for an SSD. OWC.MacSales.com. They do great.
Chuck the Grinch Joiner is not going to give you if it turns out. Okay.
It's a tough night, Ted, really. I feel like I'm being sold down the river.
There's one other thing, actually, that's all this got me thinking about. I help a lot of people with problems that they're having with their computers, mostly friends of mine now and stuff. And usually I wind up always marveling, isn't quite the word, but marveling at what a low level the understanding is of some of these things I think are really simple. And it just sort of, I don't say this to them usually, obviously. I don't want to hurt their feelings, but I think, how can you possibly not understand this? This is so basic and simple. I know people, for instance, that have been using the computer for years and still don't use copy and paste because they haven't figured that out. I mean, that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. But every once in a while, I come across someone who asks me a question to help, and it seems simple. It seems like it's going to be another one of those things where I can roll my eyes to myself and say, how can you not understand this? And it turned out that actually the more I spent time, the more I realized this is so unbelievably obtuse that Apple ought to find some way to fix it, though I'm not sure what they should do. And it had to do with iPhoto and photos from your iPhone. This is a person that had photos on their iPhone that they had taken in their camera roll, and they wanted and they understood that it wasn't a good idea to just they almost never imported their photos to iPhoto on their Mac, And they understood that that was probably a good idea to do from time to time. You don't want to just use your camera roll as your primary storage, and certainly not your only storage. But they wanted some of those photos to remain on their iPhone. And so what I would do, and what most people do who are knowledgeable how this works, is I connect an iPhone to my Mac, launch iPhoto, and one way or another download the camera roll onto the Mac, get the photos that you want into iPhoto, delete the photos from camera roll so they're not cluttering up your iPhone anymore, and then create albums or name events or whatever in iPhoto, and then go back to iTunes and make sure that go to the photo section of your iPhone on iTunes and make sure that the albums that you want to still have those pictures on your iPhone are selected, and then sync your iPhone so that those albums, those photos are then copied back to your iPhone, even though you just deleted them from the camera roll. And then I did that for some photos that she wanted, and of course she wanted to know how to do it herself. And I started explaining it. It's not at all that intuitive thing to do. And she said, "Well, first you have to import the photos into iPhoto. Then you have to figure out an album. Then you have to go back. Then you don't go to iPhone. No, then you go to iTunes. Then you have to connect your iPhone in iTunes. Then you have to find the photo section of iTunes, of your iPhone in iTunes. Then you have to see, check mark the ones that you want to sync, and then you have to make sure, of course, then back in iPhoto that the photos that you want back on your iPhone were in that album. And if you didn't create an album, well, maybe you'll find it in events. Look for an event that you just created today or something like that. And if you don't want to bother, I go, oh, no, I'm thinking, she's never going to know how to do this on her own. She's going to have to call me, for every time she wants to do something like this, because it was clear that this, the eyes were glazing over at some point in terms of how to do all this. And it occurred to me, this is not all that simple a thing to do.
I think the ways that Apple has tried to simplify photo sharing and photo syncing and moving photos around, I admire them for their attempts, but they all seem predicated on certain goals. And usually those goals have to do with sharing, as opposed to having things where you want them and having them easily organized. I agree with you. Anybody that is an enthusiast about it, they figured out a workflow that works for them. Mm-hmm. But I have to wonder if somewhere, I have not played with AirDrop that much, but I wonder if there will be a way that some of what you were talking about might be able to be accomplished with AirDrop. But is that too sophisticated for someone who is the level of user you just described? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, part of the basic problem, I think, is just the fact that it isn't even all handled in one application. That in order to do what you want to do, you have to deal with both iPhoto and iTunes, and unless you've done it, you have to know how to find a pretty obscure location in iTunes. In other words, you couldn't do it in iTunes for your iPhone unless your iPhone was connected. And if your iPhone was connected, then you have to know to go to that photo section of your iPhone connection screen in order to do what you want to do. And it's not hard. And obviously, I do it all the time. I'm sure there are a lot of people listening to this that do it all the time. But when you're talking to someone whose level of competence is that they just discovered copy and paste yesterday, sort of thing, and you're trying to help them do that, it occurs to you that this is not something that a beginning level is going to find intuitively obvious, to say the least.
It's always interesting to me to look over someone's shoulder and watch how they use their Mac, or for that matter, their PC. The copy and paste example is a great one. How many people will open one window and do something, need to do something else in another application, so they'll close that window, which may or may not close the application, then go to the other application, open it, do it, then go back to the first one. Mm-hmm. Instead of just opening up two windows, overlapping or side by side or whatever. And when you show it to them, some people get it, and some people just go into overload. And it's like, no, you're confusing me. Just let me do it the way I did it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. The level of sophistication, I still think there are a lot of people out there that are afraid of some of this stuff. And
absolutely,
I'm still surprised that exists, but I guess it's
more in our age bracket, probably. I think if you I have a granddaughter, actually. I don't know if I should admit that on radio here that I'm that old, but I have a granddaughter, and she's going to be 7 years old. So essentially, she was born around the same time that the iPhone came into existence, maybe a year later. So she has grown up in a world where she doesn't know that there was a time before iPhones. And I imagine I'm certain she will have a lot easier time with the stuff that we're talking about as she gets older than people in our age bracket who didn't, maybe touch their first computer when they were 40 years old or something like that, or 35 or whatever. So, for some people, it's like trying to learn a foreign language when you're an adult. It's a lot easier to learn a language when you're 3 years old, oddly enough, than when you're 33 years old. And that's why some people who learn English say when they're in their 40s always talk with a heavy accent, even where their children talk with no accent at all. And so maybe computers is a little bit like that. And so harder for older people to pick it up.
Yeah, maybe so. But, your granddaughter will probably get to an age that something, I don't know what the technology will be, but there'll be something that she's not up to speed on. So it just depends on, I guess, where you were born in the spectrum and whether you've tried to keep up, whether you've just had any desire to keep up.
No, that's it. Technology is stopping next year, actually.
Oh, really? Oh.
That's it. So she'll know everything.
Okay, you heard it here first.
That's right.
So you don't need to bother with that SSD that I'm not going to send you.
That's right.
Ted, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for the time. Thanks for the wisdom.
Okay, sure. Thanks for letting me come and partake of this.
We will do it again.
Okay.
Folks, Ted Landau, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Notables on Mac Voices. I hope you will visit our show notes, follow Ted on Twitter, follow me on Twitter. Take advantage of the new Mac Voices open mic at macvoices.com/open mic. We'd love to hear what you think about what we said and anything else.
Oh, is this the karaoke thing?
Oh, no, we're not doing karaoke yet. Don't give them ideas, Ted. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Okay.
Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the Mac Voices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest Mac Voices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free Mac Voices magazine on Flipboard by visiting macvoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.